Hey everyone, it's Amanda with My Life, My Way. Welcome back to TTC Tuesdays. This week and the next couple weeks coming up, I'm going to be talking about different ovulation signs that you can track so that you can sort of pinpoint your ovulation. Us women, we're only fertile a couple of days a month. We're not available, so to speak, every single day. So knowing when you're going to be ovulating when you're trying to get pregnant is a huge deal. And there are so many different things you can track. And some of them are less complicated, some of them are more complicated. And if you're trying to do all of them at once, it's extremely overwhelming. So my suggestion personally would be to start with one that you like or that you think is a little easier, and then give it a month or two to kind of get used to, and then maybe add in another one and give that another month or two to get used to, and maybe even a third or fourth. And it depends on how much stress it causes for you. The more stress it causes for you, the more emotional issues you're going to be having. There is no study that says that being stressed will decrease your fertility in any way, shape, or form, but if it starts stressing you out, it stops being fun, it stops being exciting. So do what you need to do to kind of track your ovulation and maintain your personal sanity kind of at the same time. To help me out with this video, because I'm definitely not a one-man know-it-all machine, I've been reading a few books. This one is Taking Charge of Your Fertility, and then the other one is the Mayo Clinic Guide to Fertility and Conception. They've both been fantastic knowledge pieces. They're both a great read. They're both easy to understand. And it doesn't matter if you have post-secondary education, and it doesn't matter if you're just coming out of high school and you're not really sure how all this stuff works. It's an easy enough read that it doesn't matter who you are. It's all going to make sense. When we're talking about cervical mucus in specific, that's what I want to cover this week. Cervical mucus changes throughout your cycle. So there was a thing a little while ago that went on Twitter, I don't know if you guys saw it, but there were girls posting up pictures of clean underwear saying that my underwear is clean, therefore I'm not dirty. And I'm a little confused and a little heartbroken that we've sort of like really let some of these girls down. Cervical mucus is a normal, natural part of your cycle. In different days of your cycle, it will increase in amounts or decrease in amounts. It will change in texture and consistency, but it's a normal process. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form mean that you need to like clean yourself up or go douching or anything along those lines. So please, when we're talking about this, know and understand that it's a normal process. It is a little bit weird. It does cause people to be a little bit squeamish, but after you've done it a couple of times, it sort of becomes part of the normal, natural thing you're going to be doing. And really, if you're doing this because you want to have children, things are going to get more disgusting anyways. So you might as well start now. So here's the deal. So men have seminal fluid, and it's this nice consistency, and it's full of nutrients and sugars and things like that to give the sperm the boost they need for this journey they're about to take. Because women are not fertile every day, we are not receptive to sperm every single day. When we are nearing our ovulation phase, so the earlier part is your follicular phase, right? Your eggs are growing, your estrogen starts to come on a climb, and as it starts to ramp up, we start to see some changes in cervical mucus. And then there are even more changes as it gets up and it peaks. Your estrogen peaks, and then you ovulate. And then your estrogen suddenly drops and your cervical mucus will change it again. So knowing your own body and knowing where you start that change, what your peak looks like, and then that quick drop off will help you identify when you're coming into your ovulation phase and when you ovulated. Keep in mind, everybody's a little bit different. So I'm going to talk about different types of cervical mucus, and I'm going to talk about that kind of stuff, but know that each woman is a little bit different. Not every woman goes through each type of cervical mucus, and some women don't get any real cervical mucus at all. So we'll talk about all that as we kind of go through, but if some of them seem a little weird where they kind of overlap between different types of cervical mucus, they do a little bit. And that's to just sort of include some of the women that maybe don't have a very set delinear line of I have this mucus and then this mucus and then this mucus. As much as we'd like to, we don't fit into boxes. So tracking this over a couple months will help you identify when you're coming into that ovulatory phase so you can start doing your baby dancing, and let you know when your ovulation phase is done, and you can go back to basically having sex as normal. So, the cool thing about cervical mucus, so when it changes as your estrogen hits that peak near the ovulation phase, it actually becomes more healthy for sperm. So our vaginas are usually slightly acidic, and that's meant to protect us from things like bacteria and stuff. But it's usually sort of detrimental to sperm. So this change in our mucus makes it a little bit less acidic to welcome those sperm in. It also allows them to swim up it much nicer, so it gets to where it needs to be. And it also provides nourishment for the sperm as they're on their journey as well. So that's kind of cool. It actually changes the sperm lifespan. Normally in our bodies, once sperm has come into the female body, it lives for about a day when you're outside of your fertile window. When you're inside of your fertile window, they last about 3 to 5 days. That's pretty cool. So the changes are normal and needed, but here's how we're going to check them. So they often suggest that you check cervical mucus multiple times a day, and it's really easy to do. Some things you want to note though is don't do it when you're aroused, because your body will naturally provide vaginal secretions that aren't necessarily cervical mucus, so it might be hard to identify where you are in your actual cycle if you've been aroused and you've got vaginal fluids there. And you don't want to confuse semen for cervical mucus as well, because they're fairly similar. So just make sure that when you're doing this, you haven't just had sex, you aren't about to have sex, and you should be okay. A lot of times, most women will check their cervical mucus pretty much every time they go to the bathroom. So you go to the bathroom, before you urinate, get some tissue paper, or some toilet tissue, or however you want to pronounce that. You know what I'm trying to say. I'm having a rough day today. Anyways, get it so it's flat. Open up your vaginal lips a little bit and wipe from front to back. Make sure you're getting all the way to the back, because that's where it tends to collect a little bit. And then once you've brought it back up, you can check it. Once you've got it in your hands, so you have your tissue in your hands with the cervical mucus on top, take a look at it, see what color it is. You're going to grab it between your fingers and rub it between your fingers a little bit and feel, what does it feel like? Is it gummy? Is it watery? Is it whatever? And then you're going to pull it open a little bit and see when about it breaks. Does it only go to this far and it breaks, or can you stretch it all the way to a full finger and it doesn't stretch at all? Alright, so that's the basics of how to check it. The other thing you also want to check is your underwear. So when you're not in a fertile pattern, the cervical mucus on your underwear will usually leave lines and kind of streaks on your underwear, which is totally normal. Again, please don't be grossed out by it. And during your fertile window, because it increases in how much water content is there, it sort of leaves like sort of round, small, they almost feel like puddles in your underwear. Also, again, totally normal, but it will sort of give you an idea on when you're coming into your fertile time. If you're using pads because you get a lot of sort of fluid or anything like that coming on a regular basis, you may not see that sign, just because when it hits the pad, it's going to do what it needs to. It's just going to get absorbed anyway, so it doesn't really have a chance to pool or to streak, depending on what type of fluid you're looking at. Generally speaking, they say to start checking the day after your menstrual cycle is stopped. And you may even want to do a couple of Kegel exercises on the way to the bathroom, just to kind of sort of move a little bit of that cervical fluid down towards the vaginal opening. So there's a couple of different types of cervical mucus, and I told you a little earlier that some of them overlap, but that's okay. These are just kind of the basics. So the first one I'm going to talk about is dry cervical mucus. It generally occurs right after a period and even the early part of the follicular phase. Although if your follicular phase is short, you may not actually see it go dry between your period and when you start to get into your fertile phase. It may also occur after ovulation, up until the start of your next cycle. When you're checking and you're seeing dry cervical mucus, the vaginal opening feels dry, like you don't feel wet when you're moving around. If you touch it, it kind of feels like maybe even the inside of your cheek, where okay, it's a little moist, but it's not actually wet, there's nothing there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It pretty much just feels dry. The next one I'm going to talk about is sticky. This is sort of the indication that your hormones are starting to make the ramp up. It's not generally considered fertile unless it happens right near your ovulation. Again, you gotta kind of keep an eye on your own personal body, right? What it's doing for you. But it does kind of feel like a tacky vaginal discharge. It's even described as being sort of like glue, like the stuff you used as kids. You know, it kind of gets kind of clumpy. Or it may even just be described as like rubber cement, where it's kind of got a rubbery sort of feel to it, or even kind of springy. But it's not really wet. It's just kind of thick and chunky. Yeah. The next one is thick and creamy. Not everybody gets this. It's sort of an interim phase between the sticky cervical mucus and then the fertile cervical mucus. So a lot of people actually call it a transitional phase. It's thicker, it's less elastic cervical mucus. It does kind of feel wet, but it feels kind of creamy when you're rolling it around between your fingers. It's almost like a lotion in both color and texture, and it even feels a little bit cool on your vaginal opening, just like a lotion would if you put lotion on your skin. It may be stretchy, so when you go to pull it apart, but you only get like 3/4 of an inch before it's going to break. It does not like stretch a long direction. It may also occur after ovulation in some women, and it may even occur from the time that they've ovulated all the way to the next cycle. And it depends on who you are and what kind of bodily functions you just naturally have. The last one is egg white cervical mucus. This is your fertile phase. So there's lots of cervical mucus coming out now. It's clear, it's stretchy, it's very wet, very slippery when you're touching it. A lot of the times you can stretch it for a long ways without having it break at all. And it feels kind of like egg whites when you're rolling them around in your fingers, which is why it's described as egg white cervical mucus. In some women though, it doesn't get as stretchy and it doesn't feel like egg whites. It's much more like a lubricant, like a lube. So it's not really stretchy, but it's very wet, and then there's still quite a bit of it there. You can even get a vaginal sensation at this point of feeling fairly wet. Although in the sticky and thick and creamy, you might also feel like kind of slightly wet or a little bit moist during those phases as well. This egg white cervical mucus, this is the type that's going to help the sperm reach full maturity and help the sperm pass through the cervix and get to where it needs to go, and it provides it that nutrients that it's looking for. So just a heads up though, some women with egg white cervical mucus also have it tinted a little bit in color. It may be a little yellow, a little pink, a little red, and this may indicate that you have ovulatory bleeding. That's also totally normal. It just depends on who you are as to whether or not this is going to be a symptom for you. Fun fact about the cervix that I learned today as I was going through this. Your cervix actually has crypts. They're like tiny little pockets in the lining of your cervix. And they are what produce the cervical fluid, but they're also little crevices that the sperm can hide into, and they can kind of just take shelter there during your fertile time before they make the trek the rest of the way to where they need to go to the egg. It's kind of cool. I did not know that going into this today. So, how do you identify your peak day? So yes, we've talked about how egg white cervical mucus is your more fertile time, but when is your actual peak day? Your peak day is actually the last day that the egg white cervical mucus is hanging around. As soon as the fertile phase is over, you have a sudden drop in estrogen and a sudden rise in progesterone, which is what occurs when you ovulate. And it causes a very rapid change in your cervical fluid, so that all this nice egg white cervical mucus all of a sudden just almost disappears within hours of your ovulation. And you almost basically just dry up. So your most fertile day is actually the last day that you're seeing that egg white cervical mucus, or if you're one of the people that sees like a well lubricated sort of sensation in your vagina, that last day you have that well lubricated feeling, that's your peak day. So, just kind of a random heads up. Some women also get sort of a wet, watery, even egg white sort of consistency cervical mucus just before their period starts. This is caused, they think anyways, by a drop in progesterone that causes the menstrual cycle to start, and usually the first step of your uterus shedding its lining is to sort of drop a little bit of water, which is what causes this watery sensation in women. So keep in mind, this is obviously not a fertile fluid, but I just wanted to mention this here. So if you're just starting to track your cervical mucus, you figure you've ovulated, and then all of a sudden, right before you're supposed to start getting your period again, you've got what looks like very watery, very wet cervical mucus again. You don't get confused and think that, you know, I don't know what's happening in my cycle anymore. All right, so how are we going to chart it? So every day when you're checking your cervix, checking your cervical fluid, you're going to take it out, you're going to look at it, you're going to, first of all, feel for your own vaginal sensations. And then when you're touching it again, you're going to look at it, see what color it is, rub it between your fingers for a texture or consistency, and then you're going to pull it apart and see how stretchy it gets. So, here's some examples for dry chart, or for different types of cervical mucus when you're charting. So in the dry phase, so your non-fertile stage, you might notice that your vagina feels dry, that you have no vaginal sensation of wetness, and there's really no consistency, stretchiness, color you can even monitor because there's nothing there. So it'd just kind of be NA. In the sticky phase of things, your vaginal sensations might be dry, or they could be kind of sticky feeling. When you're rubbing it between your fingers, it's very thick, very sticky, very tacky, even kind of crumbly. It might even be described as gummy or kind of springy feeling. When you try to pull it apart, you might get little peaks, or it might stretch for just like a little bit, but it's not gonna stretch a whole lot for you. It might be white, it might be yellow, it might be cloudy or opaque in color, and all those are totally normal. They're just something to track. In the creamy phase, your vaginal sensation might be wet, it might be moist, it might be that cool feeling again like I was talking about earlier because of that kind of lotiony consistency to it. When you're touching it and rubbing it between your fingers, it might feel wet or creamy or milky or sort of like a lotion in between your fingers. But it might also feel kind of clumpy, kind of gummy, kind of springy, depending on who you are. When you try to pull it apart and try to stretch it, it'll stretch, but it'll stretch for about 3/4 of an inch before it breaks easily. And it might be white or opaque in color as well. And then the last one, your egg whites, your vaginal sensation is usually pretty wet and pretty well lubricated. Like even just walking around the room, you can feel this sort of increase in wetness. When you're rubbing it in between your fingers, it feels like a lubricant, right? Like it's slippery, it's sort of watery, it's kind of even described as being kind of gushy and just very wet. The stretchiness, if they have stretchiness, you can usually get like at least an inch to it. It's quite a big move without it breaking. And the color may be clear, it might be cloudy, or like I said, if you have ovulation bleeding, it might be sort of tinted with that yellow, pink, maybe red color. So yeah, for tracking your fertility, there are lots of apps out there that track the cervical mucus like we were talking about today, the cervical positioning like we're going to talk about here in a minute, or your basal body temperature, or LH sticks, or anything else we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks coming up here. There are lots of apps out there that will track all of that for you. I have an app on my phone. I think I use Ovia is the brand name for it. It's not sponsored or anything, obviously. They're not going to pay me to say that out loud. But it's a free app. I just downloaded it on my phone. There are lots of people using lots of them. It's all personal preference, I think, as to which one you're going to like best. But most of them are free and don't charge you anything to use them. So try a couple of them out, find one you like. If you don't like it, or you're sort of a little old school, in the Taking Charge of Your Fertility book, this book that I was showing you guys earlier, they do have a charting method that's done on paper where you can track all of these symptoms and these different types of cervical mucus just by tracking it on paper. So that's kind of cool. If you're like me though, so here's the deal about cervical mucus. So 20-year-olds have this nice fertile phase that's like 4 days long sometimes in some women. As we get older, things start to kind of change up a little bit and our body becomes, I don't know if it's a little less responsive to the hormones that are changing or what, but it comes down to the point where we might only see a day or two worth of egg white cervical mucus, if at all. And I've sort of fallen down into that program of I just don't have any anymore. So it's becoming a really hard thing for me to track, and I've almost had to stop entirely because it doesn't change consistently with my body, and it doesn't matter how many months I track for. I can be completely dry even when I'm ovulating. So that's frustrating. So there are a couple products out there if you're like me, There are two of them that are fairly common. So the first one I'm going to show you guys is this one. And it's TTC by Astroglide. Sorry. They come in little individual packages. And then when you open one of them, it opens up into just a little tube. So you just break the top of the tube off, insert it into your vagina, squeeze out most of it near your cervix, as far up as you can get it. And then I just release a little bit as I'm kind of traveling down the vagina and a little bit into the vaginal opening, just to kind of lubricate us up for the sex as well. And then the other one that a lot of women are using is Pre-Seed, which is this one right here. This one's the more commonly used one because it's the older product on the market, and it's been clinically shown to actually help in sort of mimicking cervical mucus. The TTC by Astroglide is the same product, basically. There just hasn't been as many studies because it hasn't been on the market for as long. So this Pre-Seed stuff comes with a big long tube, and then a couple of applicators, and there's actually 9 of them in total, so there's 3 packs of 3 in there. You screw the applicator onto the cap, or onto the tip, of the tube, squeeze it in there, put your lid back on this, you insert this into your vagina, up to your cervix, and again, most of it goes up near the cervix, and you can kind of slide the rest of it down so that you can use it as a lubricant as well. Here's the tip about regular lubricants though. Every other lubricant that you can buy on the shelf is not considered sperm friendly because their pH levels are not balanced properly. That's the reason that these TTC and the Pre-Seed are sort of touted along in the sort of infertility groups and TTC groups, is because they're actually pH balanced to be very sperm friendly, and they're the ones that mimic your own natural egg white cervical mucus the most. So just so you know, they're kind of out there. They're an available product that lots and lots of women are using. I go back and forth between the two, and it kind of depends on where we're at and that kind of thing. Usually at home I'll use Pre-Seed, and then if I'm traveling I'll use the TTC stuff just because it's easier to drag with me, right? It just pulls right out. And I can just take 1 or 2 of these, fire them in a bag, and away I go, rather than trying to bring the entire box with the tube and the applicators and all that kind of stuff. But I use both. I don't really find any difference in them other than the application process. The month that we did get pregnant back in October, I don't even remember what product we were using, to be completely honest. It might have been, I think it might have been Pre-Seed. I think that might have been what I had with me that weekend. But they're both fairly similar, so it doesn't really matter which one you want to use, and they're both cost-wise right on the money with each other. So there's not a huge difference there either. The very last thing I want to talk about today is cervical positioning, for any of you guys that want to check cervical position. So when somebody like me who doesn't make a lot of cervical mucus, sometimes cervical positioning for me is a little bit more accurate, if a little bit more difficult. So the cervix inside your body is sort of this donut-shaped, it's basically a sphincter, right? And most of the time when you're not in your fertile phase, it's closed, it's hard, it sits low into the vagina, and it's the barrier that kind of prevents anything from getting up into my body where it should not be. As the estrogen starts to rise and things start to change, it starts to soften up, it opens up a little bit, it actually moves up the vaginal cavity, well, it moves like up towards my body, so my vaginal cavity actually lengthens out a little bit, and it becomes very wet with that cervical mucus we've been talking about. So there is an acronym that we use in infertility pages if you've seen it before. It's called SHOW. So it's soft, high, open, and wet. And that's when you're really into your fertile period. So when it's closed and it's hard, it feels kind of like the tip of your nose. When it's softer, it kind of feels like the bottom of your chin. And then when it gets really soft and you're really into your fertile phase, it kind of feels like your lips here. And it really does sort of soften and loosen up, and it opens up just a little bit. And it allows the sperm to come up and into your body to where they need to be. To check your cervical positioning, I try for first thing in the morning because I find it's the time where I'm not sexually aroused, there hasn't been any sex involved, because that will absolutely change your cervical position. And I'll go to the washroom, I'll check my cervical mucus, I'll wash my hands with soap and water, make sure you clean them. Nothing should be going in your vagina if it's not clean. I'll lay down on the bed, I'll insert one finger into my vagina and then touch the cervix and just kind of get a feel for it. The easiest way to start tracking this is actually to start doing it right after your period stops, because it'll be that nice, firm, hard sensation for at least a couple of days until you start getting into your fertile window. Once you start getting into your fertile window, you'll start noticing this sort of point of change is what they usually call it, where the cervical mucus will start to change, your cervical position and the feel of it will start to change, and you'll know that you're starting to get into your more ovulatory area of things and your more fertile window. That's pretty much it. That's all I have to say. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to see on these TTC Tuesdays. Let me know if this was helpful. If you have tips or tricks with checking your cervical mucus or your cervical positioning, drop me a note below. If you have success stories with either the TTC from Astroglide or the Pre-Seed, let me know. And also, I'm using a new camera today. This is the first time I'm actually using a camera instead of just my iPhone. So let me know if the quality was okay and the voicing was okay. I have no idea. I'm obviously going to check this before I put it online, but just let me know if it's good enough or if I should just go back to the iPhone. I'm not really sure. All right, you guys have a wonderful day. We'll see you back next week. We'll talk about more ways to track your ovulation using your bodily signs, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.